Hello, this is Julia with Livewire Libraries, and I'm doing this as part of the May Digital Project. Today, I'm going to be showing you a brief tutorial of how in Scratch you can create a game about healthy eating and healthy foods. Basically, in this game, you've got 60 seconds to choose foods. For every food that you choose that's healthy, you get points. But if you choose the foods that are less healthy, points are taken away from your score. The game rewards you as you go along, and at the end it tells you how you did score-wise. Okay, so first I'm going to open an internet browser, and I'm going to navigate to the website scratch.mit.edu. When I get to the website, the Scratch website, either I can join Scratch if I've never been in Scratch before, or if I have a sign-in, I just click on sign in. I've got a sign in, so I'm going to go ahead and type my username and password here. One thing to note, if you are signing up for Scratch for the first time, it does ask you for an email address. It is not necessary to create a sign-in or to join Scratch to create code. You can just hit the Create button in the top left-hand corner and just create your Scratch projects, but you won't be able to save them if you haven't created a sign-in and have signed into your account. So after I've signed in, it'll take me to the main page. On the top left-hand corner, I hit the Create button, and here it'll create a new project for me. And what you'll notice, so you've got several sections to the screen if you're not familiar with Scratch. You've got your tool set, which is on the left-hand side. You've got your tool blocks, which is just to the right of your tool section. Then you've got the middle of the screen, which is where you actually put the blocks to state what actions you want your characters on the stage to perform. And then on the right hand side, you've actually got the stage, which shows your sprites on top of a backdrop. Think of it as a play on a stage. This is a theater production. You've got characters on the stage. You've got the toolkit on the left hand side. In the middle is where you're arranging the tools to create the actions. And on the right hand side, you can see what the players on the stage are actually performing. Here into the bottom right hand corner where my cat sprite is, and I'm going to delete it by hitting on the rubbish bin. And then I'm going to select a new sprite by clicking on the Choose New Sprite button in the sprite area. And then you can see I've got quite a fair number of sprites to choose from, and I've got filters up at the top to help me choose different types of sprites. So if I was looking for a people sprite, I could hit the button people and it'll narrow down the choices of sprite to people. You can also import, if you've got pictures out on the internet, or if you've got artwork that you'd like to import, you can import characters into here from outside, from software or from the internet. But I've chosen a character who's already a sprite in the Scratch universe. But you can choose any character that you wish. So once I've gone ahead and chosen a sprite, left-clicked on it to select it, you'll see that it appears below the stage area in the bottom right-hand side. So you'll have a little selector there for your sprite. And you'll also see your sprite appear in the stage area at the top right-hand side of your screen. The stage area, and I can drag my sprite to wherever I want on the screen. And you see when I do that, there's an X value and a Y value. That's important. That's the X and Y value for where your character is on the screen. And we'll be using that in a minute. But let's go over here on the left-hand side to events and pull over the block when the green flag clicked. Let's bring that into our coding section, and then we're going to go into our look section and we're going to set the size. This is the size of our sprite, and I'm going to make her just a bit bigger. Then I'm going to go into my motion blocks, and I'm going to go to where I want my character to first appear on the screen. So back to that XY values, I'm going to choose approximately where she's standing now. Then I'm going to go back into my looks and I'm going to have my character say something. So she's going to say hello, and then she's going to say it for a couple seconds, and then she's going to wait a second. And I've chosen the wait 1 second block from the control blocks. Then I've gone back into the looks block and picked another say block. And here's where I'm going to have my sprite introduce the players as to what game it is they're playing. So this is a game about food choices. Then I'm going to put another wait block in there. I'm going to give the player a little bit of time to read what the sprite is saying before she continues on to say the next thing. And here she's going to say the next thing. So this is basically she's explaining to the player of the game what the rules of the game are. So here she's saying if you want to score points in the game, what you want to do is click on healthy foods. So as you see healthy foods in the game, click on those. And then next she'll explain what happens when you select unhealthy foods. So here she explains that you will have points deducted if you choose foods that are not quite so healthy. Okay, here I'm going to go into, it's actually an events block, but I find it easier to get to through the control section because it's at the bottom of the events blocks. It's called a broadcast block. And here I'm going to create a new broadcast message, which is basically to say my sprite has finished explaining the rules of the game. So now the game can start and foods can appear. So I've called the broadcast foods appear. And so this is the sprite's signal to the rest of the game. Any other characters in the game, any backdrop in the game. Basically, it's my sprite communicating to other characters, hey, she's done explaining what the rules of the game are. The game can now start, make the foods appear. And what I'm going to do very quickly before I go on, and I recommend that you do this frequently and often as you go about coding, you want to test your code to make sure, does it work as you've coded it so far? Yes, we've only gotten a few minutes into the coding, but does the code as it stands work? So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the green flag, and we're just going to test our code to make sure that the characters on the stage on the right-hand side are doing what we expect them to be doing. So let's just watch on the right-hand side and just see, is the sprite on the stage doing what we wanted them to do? Now that I'm happy that my code is working as expected, I'll go on and I'll add a backdrop. So in the bottom right-handmost corner, there's a place to add a backdrop. So I'm just going to left click on the Add Backdrop button. And here again, you have a number of backdrops that are set up. Again, you can pull one from the internet or from your artwork if you've got something out there special. I want something indoors that looks kind of like a place where food would be stored. So I'm going to pick the refrigerator backdrop that's already located in Scratch. And once I've selected my stage, what I want to do is I want to go back into that bottom right-hand corner and actually click on the stage. Very important thing to remember. If you've clicked on the stage, the code in the middle of the screen will be the code for the stage, for the backdrop. And when you click on a sprite, it'll be the code for the sprite. So make sure you know what character you've clicked on. Make sure that you've clicked on the right character, whether it be the right sprite or the right backdrop. Just if things aren't quite working, just make sure, have I put the code on the correct sprite or the correct backdrop? Okay, so I'm ready to start coding my backdrop, my stage. So I'm going to go into the events and I'm going to bring over a when green flag clicked block. Then I'm going to do something a bit different. I'm going to go into variables, and I'm going to create a couple of variables. So I'm going to left click on make new variable. And the first new variable that I'm going to create is I'm going to create a time variable so we can have a countdown clock, because I'm only going to give the person 60 seconds. And then I'm going to go back and create new variable and create a second variable and call it score. And that's so that we can count whether the player has clicked on good foods or bad foods. And then I'm going to go in and set my time variable. I'm going to start my time variable at 60 seconds. Do you have to do this? No, you can choose whatever time you like. This is up to you to decide how much time you want to give the player to score. And then I'm going to set my initial score to 0. So they start out with a time of 60 seconds and a score of 0. And then I've just hit the play button, just a green flag, just to test to make sure that my code works as coded and as planned. Okay, now I'm going to go back into control to events to find my broadcast button. So when I receive the broadcast of foods appear, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have, so this is on the backdrop, this is on the stage again. So we're going to have, let's do this as a repeat loop. You can do this several different ways. I've just decided to do this as a repeat loop. What I'm doing is I'm doing a clock countdown. So every second, my time variable is going to go down by -1. So every second of the clock between 60 and 0, there will be a countdown so that the player can see what the clock said. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a new broadcast message when the clock has counted down to the end of 60 seconds. I'm going to call that end game, because essentially after 60 seconds, the game should be ended. And I'm going to put a stop all control block in there to say, okay, after the first 60 seconds, stop the score, stop all the fruit, stop everything, the game is over. And I'm just going to go in and test my code. Remember to test your code every time you put new blocks in. You just want to make sure that you incrementally test your code. Don't wait till the very end to test it. Make sure that it works as you planned it to, bit by bit as you go along. Okay, so once I've tested that my countdown timer is working, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go back into the bottom right hand corner and click on choose another sprite. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter just my food choices. These are the food choices that are here in Scratch. If you want to pull some from the outside world, from the internet, from your artwork, you can import into the game. But I'm just going to, for now, stick with the choices that are actually here in this world of Scratch. And now some of them I've noticed are not quite as clear as others. So what I've tried to do is I've tried to stick to items that are quite clearly either good or bad, so that my player can distinguish quite clearly whether something is good or bad food. Something like the muffin, it's a little bit hard to tell that it's a muffin, I found when playing the game. So you're just going to pick an apple and a banana. So things that are clearly considered nutritionally good to eat. Every time I go back in to pick a new sprite, I'm going to have to click on the filter. Ooh, water's a good food. It's actually food, it's a liquid, but it's considered healthy. So we'll select that as good food. Strawberries, we got strawberry, banana, orange, apple, watermelon. Again, you can add, if you wanted to add more vegetables, you could go out into the internet and pick some vegetables. And now I'm going to pick my naughty foods. So the cakes and the donuts and the cheesy puffs. And let's see. Oh, yes, the fortune cookie. The heart candy. Oh, yes, and the takeaway. So you've got a takeaway box, which probably has questionably healthy contents. Could be healthy, but probably not. So I'm going to put that in our slightly naughty category of foods to select. So I just want to make sure that I have about an even amount of healthy and unhealthy sprites in my game. And again, I want to make sure that I've selected the sprite. So in the bottom tray there of the sprites, you just want to make sure that you've selected the apple sprite to start. And I can tell that I'm on the apple sprite because in the middle coding area, I can see the image of the apple in the top right hand corner of the coding area. So I'm just going to do the when green flag clicked for my events area. And then I'm going to go into looks and I'm going to do a hide. So basically this is the section where the sprite girl is talking and she's explaining the rules of the game. So I don't want the fruit to appear when she's explaining the rules of the game. I want her to complete what she's telling the player, what the rules are. And then only after she's explained the rules do I want the game to start. So I'm going to hide all these sprites until we're ready to actually start the game. Okay, and then we've got the broadcast message. When I receive the message, foods appear, that's when I know the game has started. And so at that point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send the apple as a sprite to a random position, which is a motion block. I'm going to set the size of my apple because it might be too large or too small. So here I'm going to shrink it down to about 50% of its current size. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it show because we're ready to start the game. So I want the foods to show. And then I'm going to drag in another broadcast block when I receive the end game. So when I receive the message that the game has ended. And how do we know that the game has ended? It's because our time has counted all the way down from 60 seconds to 0 seconds. That's how we know that the game has ended. So once the game has ended, I'm going to hide the food so that the player doesn't keep trying to click on food once the game is ended. There are different ways to do this. This is just the way I've done it. But see, if you're interested, see if you can find another way to do the same concept here, which is to have the food hide when the sprite is explaining the rules, have it go to a random position and show itself when the game is going on, and then have it not show itself once the game has ended. Now I'm going to go into my events code block and bring in a code block which says when the sprite is clicked. So what happens when the sprite is clicked? What happens when the player clicks the sprite? So I'm going to have the sprite hide, and then I'm going to change the score by 1. So I'm going to increase the score by 1 because we're on the apple. So I want to reward the player for selecting the apple. And then once I have the apple selected and it's hidden, I'm going to have it go to a new random position and show itself at the new random position. So essentially what it's doing is if the player has clicked on the apple, it's going to give them a positive score. So it's going to increase their score by 1. The apple's going to hide itself and then go to a new random position on the stage, and then it's going to unshow itself. And at that point, the player can click on it again if they so choose and score additional points. Now there's another way to do this with clones if you want to have multiple apples on the screen at the same time. But I just want it, since I've got so much food on the stage, I've decided that I'm just going to show one of each kind of food at a time. So if the player selects that food, then it'll hide, find a new random position, and show itself again. So there won't ever be 10 apples on the stage. But if you wanted there to be 10 apples, there's a way to do it with cloning. So after this, you can go away and see if you can figure out how to do that. But for this game, I just decided one apple on the stage at one time was enough. Okay, so what do you do when you have a lot of sprites and the code for one of the sprites is very similar to the code for the other sprites? Well, there's a little trick that I'm going to show you today, which is something that you see at the very bottom of your screen. You should see it. It's called the backpack. And this is very important if you have a lot of code that you want to copy and paste across sprites. So what I'm going to do, first of all, what I want to do is I want to make sure that my backpack is clear. So if there are any code blocks that are already in the backpack, I want to right click on them and delete them so that as to avoid confusion. And then I just drag and drop the code that I want to copy onto the other sprites into my backpack. So you see it's copied it. And then what I can do is click on my next sprite and just drag that code that I want to copy from the backpack into that middle area of the screen for that particular sprite. And I can do it over and over again and save myself a lot of effort and time. But you only want to do this once you're certain that the code is correct and you've tested it to verify that it is working properly, because obviously once you've copied code into 20 different sprites, it's going to be a lot of work to undo it if it's not working correctly. So make sure you always test your code first before you do this step. Another thing you want to be sure to do after you've done quite a bit of work, or actually before you do too much work, is you want to go up in the top to that bar, that empty bar area at the top, and you want to type in a project name. I'm going to call this the Healthy Food Game. And then you want to go into the File pull-down menu and click on Save Now, because you want to save your work. Again, you can only do this if you're signed into the Scratch website. So if you've got a sign on and you've signed in, you can save your work. But definitely recommend that you save your work frequently. And the reason that I've brought the hide blocks in for all the other foods, in addition to the apple, is what I want to do is I want to run a test now to make sure that the apple code works, because before I drag all the code from the apple into the other foods, I want to make sure it works for the apple first. So the first task is to test my code on the apple, and then if I know it works on the apple, then I can copy and paste that into the backpack and drag it onto the other sprites. So here I'm just testing it by clicking on the apple, checking to make sure the score is working, making sure the time clock is counting down, clicking on the apple, just testing it out. Does the apple change to a random position when I click on it? Does it increment the score by 1 when I click on it? Is the timer clock counting down correctly? Just making sure that the code in general works before I put the code into the backpack and add it to the other sprites. Okay, once I'm happy that my code is working as expected, I'm ready to drag the block sections from the apple sprite into my backpack so that I can easily paste them into my other sprites. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to, in each food, I'm going to select the sprite in the bottom tray, and then I'm going to drag the code from the backpack into the middle area of that sprite. So here I am on the banana, dragging the code into the banana. And then I'll do that for the water and the orange and so on and so forth. And as I'm going along, you'll notice that I'm changing the size, the appearance size of each food. And that's just to make it sort of fit in with the stage on the right hand side. You know, if a food is too big or if a food is too small, I'll just go ahead and change the size to make it bigger or smaller as I think is appropriate. And you can choose whatever sizes you want. You know, if you want to make the watermelon really small and challenging, or if you want to make them bigger so that they're easier to see the foods, you know, go for it. This is your game. You can make it as challenging or as easy as you'd like. Right, so I've gotten to my sprite of my first naughty sprite, which is the cake. And I don't want it to actually increment the score. So what I want it to do is when the player clicks on it, I actually want it to change the score by -1. So I'm going to change that in the blocks from +1 to -1. And then when I go on, I want to make sure that the other ones say -1. So I'm going to want to change it in my backpack. What I'll do is I'll delete the code that says +1 and I'll replace it in the backpack with the new code that says -1, so that for my naughty foods, I make sure that when the sprite is clicked, the code subtracts a point rather than adds a point. And now you can choose whatever score you want. So if you want the water to be extra points, if you want the cake to be extra negative points, you can actually choose to make the apple 2 points and the water 5 points and the cake -3 points. Again, this is your game, so you can change the score however you wish. Okay, so when I've got to the last sprite and taken my code from the backpack onto the sprite, what I'm going to want to do is I want to test my game. So run through the game again and make sure that everything's working as correct. If not, this is your opportunity to tweak the code, maybe make your sprites larger, smaller, change your point scoring. Just make sure the clock is working and that the behavior is expected. So if you click on a not so good food, it turns the score negative. And then if you click on healthier foods, it turns the score more positive. Just test it and make sure your code works. Okay, I tested the code and it's pretty much working as I expect. So that's good. However, I'd like my original sprite, the girl sprite, to give a bit of positive reinforcement. Want some more interaction between her and the player. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to basically make a judgment about the player. I'm going to pull a block, one of the broadcast blocks. So when the sprite, when she receives the end game message, she's going to make a comment, either a positive comment or try again comment based on the player's score. I've chosen here a score of 20, but you can choose a different score if you want. So the first thing that I've done is I've gone into the control blocks and I've chosen an if then else statement. And then I've gone into the operator blocks and I've chosen if this is less than this. So I've chosen if this is less than this block. So I want it to say if my score, so I need to pull the variable score from the variable section. So if the score is less than 20, then I'm going to basically ask the player to try again. So I go into my looks blocks, and I'm basically going to say to the player, click on the green flag and try again. This time, try to choose some healthy food choices, try to make better choices. But if the user scores 20 points or higher, I'm going to give them a different message. So I'm going to drag in another looks block, say block, and here I'm going to say well done, and I'm going to basically reinforce them, say those were some great food choices. If you want to make it harder, you can increase the score. Maybe you want to increase it to 30 or 40, or if you want to make it easier, you can lower the score. But I just thought 20 was a good point. But that's basically saying well done at the end of the game, or try again at the end of the game. But what if I want to give the player positive reinforcement throughout the game? What I can do is I can have the sprite girl actually reinforce the player whilst they're making their choices during the game. So that's what I'm going to work on next. So what I'm going to do is go into the first sprite. So I'm going to click on my apple sprite, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to broadcast a message when the user clicks on me. So when the user clicks on the sprite, when the player clicks on the sprite, I'm going to call that a good choice. I'm going to have it broadcast a good choice message if the player clicks on the apple sprite. What I'm going to do is I'm going to clear my backpack so that it's empty, and then I'm going to copy that new code into my backpack. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go along in all my sprites and replace just that bit of the code when the sprite is clicked. I'm going to replace it with the new code, which has that just little bit added in, which says when the user clicks on the sprite, broadcast a message to say that they made a good choice. Now, obviously, when you get to the naughty foods, you need to change that. So what we're going to have to do, because we're in the naughty foods, we're going to have to remember to change the score by -1 again. So change the score to -1 or whatever your negative point value was. And we're going to have to do a new broadcast message. So new message, and we're going to call this bad choice. And we're going to delete the good choice blocks from the backpack and replace it with the bad choice blocks, because we're into our bad choice foods here. So we're just going to make sure that the code that we copy and paste into our bad choice sprites has the bad choice code in it rather than the good choice code. And just remember, when you've done a lot of work like this, to save your work and save it often. Okay, now I'm going to go back to my girl sprite. So I'm going to left click on her again. And now remember, we've decided that some foods are good choices and bad choices. So what we're going to do is build some code into the girl sprite to tell the player whether they've made a good choice or a bad choice as they're actually making it. So another broadcast block in, when I receive good choice, I'm going to give the player a looks message to basically tell them good choice. And then I'm going to build a second broadcast block in there about what to say when the player makes a bad choice, and it's going to have a different message. So here in the looks block, it's going to ask them if they can find something healthier. So if they make a good choice, it'll say good choice. If they make what we feel is a poor choice, it's going to ask them, can you find anything healthier? Can you find something healthier? And again, save now. After you've done a bit of work, always make sure to save now. You don't want to lose your work. And of course, as always, test. Make sure that you test your code and that it's working as planned. If there's any issues with it, any bugs with it, just make sure that you work it out at this point before you roll it out to the players. And when you're testing your code, you want to test a number of different scenarios. So what if the player selects all healthy choices? What happens when they select all unhealthy choices? What happens when they select a combination of good and bad choices? What happens when the good choices outweigh the bad? What happens when the bad outweigh the good? You need to test all possibilities to make sure that your code is working as planned. Well, thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed that and learned a bit about how to build a game in Scratch. And I look forward to seeing you again next week.